Good morning, everyone. My name is Javier Montero Pozo, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the director of the Center for Spanish Studies, which is located at the University of Washington in Seattle. The Center for Spanish Studies is an educational outreach initiative of the Ministry of Education of Spain, the University of Washington, and the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction in Washington. I will tell you a little bit more about the objectives of the Center for Spanish Studies later on. But now, I'm going to give a talk about the concept of autonomy when it comes to learning, and more precisely, learner autonomy in the field of second language acquisition. By autonomy, I mean the student's own control of the learning process, but I will also give you some other definitions about this concept later. As a teacher of foreign languages, I have always been very interested in implementing new methods and approaches because this is what teachers normally do. We like to try new things, new tendencies, and some of them are easily implemented, but some others don't work at all. And this is what happened to me when I started to deal with the concept of autonomy. So before we move on, I would like to give you some details about my teaching background so that you can understand much better the aim of this presentation and why I started researching on this topic. I have been teaching for 18 years and I have gone through almost all the different educational levels in the Spanish education system. I started my professional career teaching English and French as a second language to middle school students. And then I transferred to high school, teaching only English as a second language. Before moving to the States, I was teaching at a community college for foreign languages, and I was teaching there for 6 years. So, you might ask, why did you come across the concept of autonomy? Well, the answer is that I saw my students' performance and that was not the expected one. And I also saw that the time dedicated in the class for the master of the second language was not enough. I saw that my students needed to work on their own at home if they wanted to learn to master this second language. So I started to investigate on my own because I was afraid that I was the only one at school with this problem, with this issue. But that wasn't true. I realized little by little that my co-workers also had the same problem. And this was that our students were not autonomous enough, and that prevented them from reaching the goal they had in mind, which was to communicate effectively in a second language. So we decided to work together towards a common goal, and it was to empower our students so that they could control their own learning process. We designed a plan of action and this plan of action consisted of analyzing our students' needs, and by knowing our students' needs, we could create and implement fun and motivating activities, and hopefully our students, they could obtain really good results. So after this research, I am 100% positive that we should start teaching our students how to be autonomous since an early age. I know that your answer is going to be, it is tough. Yeah, I know it is tough. And on top of tough, it is time consuming. But the benefits, the perks would be invaluable. And this is how the project, Speaking for Yourself, came into existence. I'm going to give you more details about the project. It is a European project co-funded by the European Union and by the government of Spain. The title, Speaking for Yourself, refers to the fact of working on your own to advance, to master the second language you are studying. And we were not the only schools involved in this project. We partnered with some other schools in Europe. and they also had the same problems. And why did we decide to partner with other schools in Europe? Well, the answer is simple. Like, the more people investigating into this subject, the more opinions we would get, and finally, better results. So the project has its own website, and the really good thing about this is that you can see all the tools that we created and all the steps that we took. And something which is very important is that you can download all the activities that we created and all the tools, and you can edit them according to your needs, and most importantly, to your students' needs. So I'm going to give you a little bit more I'm going to give you more context, a little bit more of context about how the project evolved and what I was doing at that time. Well, at that time, like I said before, I was teaching at a community college for foreign languages, so that means that my students were pretty motivated adults who were willing to learn English as a second language. However, after the first quarter, the fall quarter, they were totally discouraged, and this mainly happened because speaking was the most difficult, the most challenging skill for them. They had difficulty in expressing their own opinion. As for the other skills, for example, reading and writing, they were okay. And listening was a little bit troublesome, but as it is an input skill, they only needed time and patience. And obviously practice. Well, they didn't have enough time to study the language, the foreign language, because they had a job, they had a family, and on top of that, they didn't know how to study a foreign language, which was crucial to this problem. And finally, there was no motivation. The motivation wore off. So that's why we decided to design a plan. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the plan that we designed. For that, we really need to know what autonomy means. And I'm going to give you some definitions by popular authors. And finally, I will give you the one I have been using so far, and the one that I think is the most appropriate one, having into consideration the context and my students' needs. I will also explain to you like the different steps that we took and the tools that we designed. Remember that you can find all these in the on the website of the project. And finally, I will give you an example of activities, but you can also find a bunch of activities on the website of the project. So let's go to the definition of the concept of autonomy. I'm going to give you two of them, like really popular ones, one by Holek and the other one by Leslie Dickinson. And if we start with Holek's definition, Holek says that autonomy is the ability to take charge of one's own learning. I really like this definition, and I totally agree with Holek, but I think that this definition refers to the concept of self-instruction, when you don't really need a teacher at all. And if we go with the second one, Leslie Dickinson's, she says that autonomy is a situation in which the learner is totally responsible for all the decisions concerned with their learning and the implementation of those decisions. I really like this one as much as the first one. However, I also think, from my humble opinion, that this refers to self-instruction. And again, I think there is something missing in here. I really like both of them because they focus on the main actor, who is the student. But I will give you like the one I use for myself, I have been using for myself all this time, and so far is the one that I find the most appropriate, because Autonomy is that stage in the teaching learning process where students can implement their own learning techniques and advance in the mastery of a foreign language by creating activities on their own, after the instructor has taught them how to learn by themselves and is always there as a backup. I think that everything in life is learned either by formal or informal learning, but in this process there must be always a role model that guides the process, and in this context it would be the teacher who would be giving the students the prompts about how to learn by themselves. So I also think that the teacher apart from the student, who is the main actor in this context, the teacher is also or plays a relevant role in this situation. And we also had in mind that these techniques, these activities were to be developed by the student on their own, but it was more fun if there were students A and students B that could work together, for example, at home or through Zoom or Skype or any other platform. So in order to investigate a bit more about the concept of autonomy, we needed a research method. And we came across action research because one of the members of the group had previously worked with this method. We didn't know so much about it, but I must admit that the more we read about it, the more we liked it. So I'm going to give you first like the definition of the concept action research, and then I will tell you all the steps that action research consists of. Well, for the definition, you have in there 2 paragraphs. I have broken it down into 2. I'm not going to read the whole definition, you can read it there, but I have highlighted certain words. So for example, in the first part of the definition, I have highlighted reflective process. So action research is a reflective process, and I totally agree with that. And I think this is something that teachers usually do. Before planning, while teaching, after the teaching learning practice has finished. It is something that we are always continually doing because we want to improve. We want our students to achieve their goals and our goals. So that's why we are pondering about the teaching learning process. And the second part of the definition, which I think is the most important one, is that action research is a collaborative activity among colleagues searching for solutions to everyday real problems experienced in schools. Well, if you remember at the very beginning of the presentation, I said that I began to investigate on my own because I was afraid I was the only one at school with that problem. Make me say, because there were some other co-workers with the same problem, and I was afraid to share like my fears. I was afraid to share my experiences in the classroom with my co-workers because I thought I was the only one. So the teaching learning process boils down to reflection and sharing. Please, if you don't do that, start sharing with your co-workers your fears and your problems in the teaching learning process, because I'm sure they will help you and you will help them to find solutions to those problems. So as for the action research, the program lasted 3 years, and every year we used this method with a different goal in mind. For example, in action research 1, which corresponds to the first year, we wanted to make sure that our students had the right tool as a starting point to measure the level of the language they had. They needed to know what level they had in order to start building up, like improving, studying, working on that. As for the stage 2, we wanted to keep track of the teaching learning process because our goal in mind was to motivate our students, and by motivating them we would be also motivated. So that was stage number 2. Also, we had in there like the tool, the creation of some activities, and in stage number 3 we created a whole bunch of activities, and obviously it was the end of the project. Well, I said before that I was going to give you the definition of action research, and we said it is a reflective process and a collaborative activity. So now I'm going to give you the steps that are to be followed in order to use this method. So the first one is to spot the problem. And like I said before, my students' oral production was not the expected one. So obviously I had information about this issue, because every time we had a discussion in the class, my students had difficulty in expressing their own opinions and they didn't communicate effectively. So I had to organize and analyze and interpret all this information, and I came to the conclusion that the performance was not expected, and we didn't have enough time in the class for them to advance. So they also needed to work at home. So the plan was to create tools and activities for our students. And also, like the second part of that plan was to motivate our students to use those tools, those activities, not only in the class but also at home. Obviously, there was evaluation of the plan, because we implemented like the main tool, which is a rubric that I will tell you a little bit about it afterwards, and the activities. We implemented the plan, we evaluated the results by asking our students, what do you think about those activities that we have already done in the class and the tool that I have provided you with? And the answer was positive, feedback was positive. Their main fear was to interpret the descriptor in order to evaluate appropriately their peers' level. That was their main worry. And obviously, when you try something for the first time, when you try something out, there will be problems to be fixed. We had some problems to fix, and we fixed them. We think we fixed them. And as the expression says, practice makes perfect. So we had to repeat the whole process like several times. Well, the tool that we created is this rubric, and as you can see, it is a circle. We wanted it to be very attractive, very visual for our students, and this rubric is divided into 6 sections. Those sections refer to the different aspects of the language. In this way, we have vocabulary range, social linguistic appropriateness, coherence and cohesion, spoken fluency, phonological control, grammatical accuracy. And these sections are in turn divided into 3 stages. The most important one is the norm. And why is it the most important one? Because it gives you the descriptor, and these descriptors determines the level of the student according to the course he is taking. So, for example, imagine that I want to evaluate first like the vocabulary range in a speaking activity. So I will have to check the descriptor of the vocabulary range to know exactly which state I need to evaluate my student with. So the norm for the vocabulary range is that the student has enough language to get by. Obviously, he might have some hesitations or use circumlocutions on topics such as travel, current events, work, etc. So if I think that my student fulfills like the level of the language according to the course he is taking, I will draw the stage of the norm in the vocabulary range section. However, if for sociolinguistic appropriateness my student doesn't fulfill the descriptor of the norm, I will have to draw the stage of below the norm in the section of sociolinguistic appropriateness, because below the norm means that my student's performance is not the expected one, is poor. However, on the contrary, above the norm means that my student's performance is much better than the expected. That is, the level of the student is higher than the course he is taking. So these are the descriptors for the rubric, and this rubric corresponds to the level intermediate, high, and actful. Okay, so I also wanted to show you this picture because, like I said before, we wanted it to be visual, attractive. So it is fulfilled by drawing the different stages according to the level of the student. We wanted our students to take a look at the rubric, and at first sight they would really know the stage they had to work a little bit more on. So I think that this is like a really good result. Please, if you are also working on this topic and you came up with rubrics, or if you have some ideas in order to improve this, you have my email address that I will also give you at the end of the presentation, and please feel free to email me. So as for action research 2, the main goal in here was motivation. So how were we going to motivate our students? We thought that the tool and the activities were enough, but then we realized that we needed to do something else. We needed to keep track of the teaching learning process like in a closer way. So we thought that journaling was the best idea to do this, and not only were the students going to journal, but also the teachers. Because in this action research method, as I said before, reflection and sharing are the most important things. So as for the students, they would write in their diaries or in their journals everything that they worried about or everything they were happy with, because not everything is going to be negative. We also wanted to read, to hear positive things about this action research, because we were trying to better our teaching practice, at the same time we were also trying to improve our students' results. So the teacher would take these journals once or twice a week, and he or she would read them to see if the students were struggling with any issues. And there were office hours, obviously, not only for those students who had difficulties, but for those all the other students who were happy with the learning process. So, and finally, I also have to say that we started creating a lot of activities that would be included in the digital toolbox in the next year. And step 4 is reflection on the overall process. Reflection is really, really important. So now I'm going to explain an activity that I have developed with my students, and it is a simple activity, but it is really fun. So they are always asking to repeat this activity, because what it seems as a regular activity, as a normal activity, it is a kind of activity that they enjoy. It is a vocabulary activity in which they have to tell a story, taking into consideration the prompt, the beginning of the story that I have given them. So the really good thing about this is that they will have to introduce in the story several words that they don't know about. So I will show those words because I will project those words on PowerPoint slides, so everybody will be able to see them. And the way they work is the following one. So we will pair the students in twos, and one will be student A and the other one will be student B. Student A will start telling the story, and when I show them the word, they will have to introduce the word in the story in the amount of time that I consider. The amount of time that I consider is given by the level of the students, as well as the number of words that they will have to introduce in the story. So what apparently is a regular activity is like a really fun activity, because they know the beginning but they don't really know what the end will be, because when they have to introduce these words, this story is not a regular story, it is a surreal story. So I also use a buzzer in order to indicate that a new word is going to appear and they will have to introduce that word, and that makes it like a little bit of a competition for them. As for the duration of the activity, it will take up to 25-30 minutes, but it also depends on the level of the students and if you want to do some follow-up questions. So for example, for my students in intermediate high, after the story, I'd also told them that they should ask some questions about the story or what they thought it was going to happen, but it didn't. So that depends up to you. But you can also find a lot of activities on the website of the project, and there will be also really fun activities, and please, I hope they are of great value to you, and if they are, send me an email. Well, these are the references in the presentation, and like I said at the very beginning, well, you know that the Center for Spanish Studies is located at the University of Washington in Seattle, and our main goals are to provide educational resources in Spanish and professional development activities for educators. We also have some other goals, which is to support and foster bilateral education agreements with districts, with some other institutions. And you have in there our website. If you want to find to see a little bit more about what we do, the activities that we develop, please feel free to visit our website. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your time. And again, if you have some questions or concerns about this presentation, do not hesitate to reach out to me. That's my email address. Thank you very much.